There are several types of representation in Autodesk Inventor assemblies. Under representations, you can see view representations, position representations, and level of detail. In this assembly, we'll create a new position representation. The master representation will show us how the assembly was built. This new positional representation, which we'll call open, will allow us to pose the assembly in a different way. Under relationships, we can find the actuator stroke assembly constraint. With a right click, you can choose override and establish a new value of 0.67 inches. Applying this will show the actuator ram being pulled back into the body and opening the clamp. We can create another new positional representation, which we'll call free. We'll select the same actuator stroke assembly constraint, choose override, and this time we'll go to suppression and we'll suppress that assembly constraint. The effect this has is the ability to click and drag on portions of the assembly and have it move. This temporarily suspends that constraint. We can go back to any other positional representation with a simple double click and have it update the appearance of the assembly. This also carries forward to assemblies that use the clamp assembly. Selecting the clamp assembly and going to representation, you can choose which positional representation you want to use in the assembly. Clicking open for the one on the left, you'll see the one on the right is unaffected. You can also use a representation on that and set that as free. By allowing this assembly to be flexible, you can grab portions of the subassembly and move it in the main assembly as well. Moving on to the view representation, we have our master view representation, which will show us the colors of the assembly based on their materials. We have the default view representation. Now let's create a new one. We'll call it painted, where we can select the components on the screen or in the browser, override properties such as the color, and be able to create a representation of what the product will look like as it's delivered to customers. Let's return to the default representation and create a new one. This one we'll call Hub. With the Hub representation active, we can select components in the window, right-click, and deselect visibility. This does not remove the components from memory, it simply turns them off. Under level of detail representation, we can take things to that next level. Let's create a new level of detail. We'll refer to it as clamps off. Now we can take the clamp subassemblies, some additional components, and instead of removing their visibility, we'll right-click and select Suppress. Doing this will remove the items from memory and greatly reduce the strain on the computer. Comparing the component count with this level of detail versus master, you can see the difference that it makes. In the drawing file, we have the ability to edit the drawing view and change the view representation that's used to generate the drawing. Since I've limited my view representation to the hub, I can modify the parts list as well, engaging a filter and choosing to use the assembly view representation of the hub to populate the parts list. Using this technique can spare you from having to create a separate subassembly when what you want to do is display and document a group of components that need to be built as a subassembly.